Cool. And so we're recording now. We can keep this pretty informal, but I guess I'll just make a couple of noises before we jump in here, and before I share the actual document. So this is like a mini voter registration training that we want to share with all of our coalition partners here ahead of the People's Forum, the candidate forum, so that organizations can go out and start to build power and register voters, and educate them on their issues ahead of the forum. And so you can, at the forum, say, hey, we've registered this many voters who we know support this issue, in a nutshell. And so we met with some folks from the League of Women Voters to we got trained in some voter registration, and then we kind of adapted that and said, well, I think we could probably change this a little bit, and that's what we put together and what we're sharing tonight. Just a real simple voter registration toolkit. Scott or Graciela, anything else to add to that opening?
No.
Okay. Just that I think all in all, it is a pretty simple process. There's like certain things that they highlighted that we should remember, but it's not as scary as I thought it would be. So I guess to just find comfort in that.
Yep. Great point. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the actual toolkit on the screen, and so everybody will be looking at the toolkit in the video at this point. And so Graciela, did you want to kick us off here? How to use the toolkit?
So I did go over the toolkit, and I read the description, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory in the sense that it did a really good job bullet pointing where to look and kind of what to say. I like the part that you mentioned whenever we're talking to candidates to say, this is who I am, this is where I'm from, this is how many people we have registered. Right. I like that we included the websites where to get the information, because they're really user-friendly and there's no need to reinvent the wheel in that sense.
Right.
Because all the information is already there.
Right. Yeah. Good. Okay. I guess the last thing I'll add to that is when one of the things that we won't talk about specifically when talking about registering voters is just a I don't know, piece of advice to know how many registered voters you have, whether that's in your organization or your neighborhood, what have you. And so that's one of the bullet points that Graciela is talking about here. So yeah, I agree. It's pretty self-explanatory, and folks will bump into that when they pick up the toolkit. So in this toolkit, we have a voter registration guide, and Scott's going to walk us through that. We had a voter tips handout that Kaylee Proctor put together. Kaylee's not with us tonight because she just gave birth last night. But it looks like Kathy's here as well. Hey, Kathy.
Hi.
And Kathy's with the League of Women Voters, and was generous enough to train us in voter registration. And so we do have this voter tips handout, and then we have some information on the last city commission election that folks might find useful in terms of who voted, where did they live, and those kinds of things that you might use to inform where you do your door knocking or outreach work. So with that being said, let's talk about the voter registration guide, and Scott put this together. And Scott, you want to take it from here?
Sure. So the first couple pages there are the Kansas, first the federal and then the Kansas forms. They encouraged us to use the federal form just because its instructions have less kind of threatening language. Some of the warnings in the Kansas instructions can be a little scary to when you actually read them. So most people would probably be better off using the federal form. So that's first. The only notes I've really typed on there are in the home address box, that should be there in line 2. That would be the address where they would want their voting to be connected with. So that should be at the in the jurisdiction where they would be voting. And then if they're a student, they would complete line 3 where their current address is, if that's different from box 2. And the rest of it to me seemed pretty self-explanatory. In 8 there, that's not required. The race or ethnic group, that's not required in Kansas. That can be left blank. And then down in the bottom part, that C would not be used. I typed in there not applicable because only in rural areas with no addresses would that be necessary. And we have addresses even in rural areas. On the Kansas, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about on the address. My assumption is that address needs to be a physical address. And so a post office box then would go in the line 3 if people use that as their mailing address.
Good point.
Yes. This is especially important. This is Kathy. This is especially important in Ogden because they have physical home addresses, but they all receive their mail through P.O. boxes. And so they put their home address because it will let the county clerk know where they are located in order which races then they can vote in. So even though they don't receive mail at that home address, that is their physical address.
And that's the way it is in St. George too.
Mm-hmm.
Good question. Okay, so Scott, on the second page is the instructions for the Kansas voter registration application, and what you're saying. You were saying, it's the federal form is actually easier. Was there anything else that so use that one? But was there anything else to say about the Kansas voter registration?
Not really, other than that we were encouraged to have both of them with us, a few of the Kansas forms, just in case someone does specifically ask for the Kansas form. It'd be a good idea to have those with you.
Great.
Okay. Yeah, may I add one thing? That is that on the Kansas form, it does list the party affiliations that people can put on the federal form because there's only a few of them. Democratic, this is on right up above the black box. It says complete if previously registered. Right up above that, it says party affiliation. Yeah, there, and right up above that,
yeah,
it says party affiliation. So the only only answers that people can write in that box, I believe box 7 on the federal form, is Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, or not affiliated. So if they put down independent, that's an incorrect answer because there's actually an independent party in Kansas. So right there, Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, or not affiliated.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kathy.
You're welcome.
And in passing here, just for clarification, where do people get these forms?
You can print them off,
right?
And just have, and they don't have to be in color. But we found that the county clerk, their office is very helpful in giving groups that want to register voters. They'll give them to you.
Okay.
And so that's, I think, very helpful.
Cool.
And
so
they have the federal forms as well. Usually they give like 20 at a time out, but if you know that you're going to need quite a bit more, you could let them know and they would give them to you. But they're really good about it, very helpful if you're struggling with one of the answers.
Great. So those are super easy to get.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, Scott, we're down to the voter registration guide itself.
Right, and there are some bullet points there. Just as was mentioned before, assisting fellow citizens is not difficult. Just a few things to keep in mind, that it is, something to be treated with respect. It is a legal document, and part of that is that it has to be turned in right away to the county clerk within 24 hours, or Monday if it's done on a weekend. And then just the part to not show any partisanship in clothing or in talking with folks you're helping to register. Declining to even respond to comments that they might want to make in discussions, because that could be a problem. And let's see, the rest of that, it's all written, you can read. They don't have to send in any documentation, a birth certificate, etc. I think that's something that a lot of people have a misconception about. The only real requirement is to have a government issued photo ID when they actually go to vote. And so that need to be from a driver's license is usually the answer, but there are other photo IDs. And re-registering when they move, change the name or gender, and about how students can, as we've already mentioned, can register either to vote in their parents' home where they permanently live or where they live currently. They have a choice. And then, of course, we've been talking about paper forms. Of course, many people would be very happy and it's quick and easy to vote using the ksvotes.org on their smartphone, tablet, etc. I think that pretty well covers what I thought was critical.
Yeah, and that
Other thoughts?
I would just add that online registration, like that takes like 90 seconds. Like that is super easy for people who like will accept that, or are open to doing it online. I mean, that's just a super easy way of doing that. And if I remember right, the only thing, a major thing you just have to keep in mind there is that people registering will also have to put their signature on that, and that when they do, it's got to look, like when you sign something with your finger, on your phone or whatever, like you want to be careful because it really has to come pretty close to what your signature looks like when you sign it with like a pen, right? Am I remembering that right, Kathy?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's very true. The other thing is, with this ksvotes.org, we found that to be very fast. But on the state website, they say if you're going to do it on your phone, you got to do it 45 days in advance of the end of voter registration so the state can get it logged in. And that they have that disclaimer on there, which I think is a leftover from the previous office holder. Because as far as we can tell, people are getting feedback right away when they use the ksvotes.org. They are registered.
Okay.
So anyway, but I didn't want that information not to be even mentioned. But it's strange, and it's still on the website that way. So that's one of the reasons we're encouraging people to use KS Votes instead of using the signing on with the Secretary of State's online form.
Okay.
And one other thing is I see under additional considerations, and Scott, in case I forget to tell you, I think you really made this very clear, and I just appreciate that very much. But the advantage with this ksvotes.org is they can also, when you run across students who want to register at home but live here, that it's very, very easy for them to sign up for mail-in ballot at the ksvotes.org, as long as they have like a driver's license. It's really, really simple to do it, and it basically uses the same information as what they put in to register. So they might look for that that advance ballot by mail, and then it just comes to their house, and the likelihood they will vote then is much higher than if they have to drive home on election day.
Great.
Something else I really remember from our meeting was that we can fill out everything except the signature, right? We can help them fill out everything on the form, but they have to be the ones to sign.
Yes. Even if it's just an X, that's a legal signature. A legal signature.
Great. Yeah, great point. Okay, Scott, did you want to add anything else there?
I don't think so.
Cool. Thanks. That was good.
Thank you.
Really great, quick overview. Like we said, like Graciela said, like it's not rocket science really. It's just something that probably people have never done before. So it's like, oh, I don't want to screw this up or something, but it is pretty easy. Okay. So I did make Kaylee made a voter tips handout, and we're looking at that right now. So this is something that you could, when you are going around, registering voters, you keep this in your back pocket. If you're going to bring this toolkit to your organization and train other people and how to use it, you could print these. This card off, and people can stick it in their back pocket, right? Just like a summary of some really, essential information here. Much of it that we've already covered here. The things that we haven't covered are the important dates. So there's October 15th. That's the last day to register to vote in the general election. And October 16th is advanced voting in person by mail begins. And then November 5th is the election. Now, keep in mind our forum, the People's Forum, is on October 10th. So that's actually before the last day to register to vote for the general election. So we'll be registering voters at the actual event itself. So on that note, this brings up another thing that our team talked about, which was how do you register voters in this nonpartisan way, or I guess a more accurate way to say it is all of our organizations are getting organized around specific issues. So, for example, Renters Together is, if I understand right, is organizing around a rental inspection ordinance, right? And you can integrate voter registration into your campaign for that particular issue. That would be that's a non-partisan that's a non-partisan activity. Where you could educate people on that issue, you could talk to them about the issue and see what they think about that issue. You wouldn't be able to talk to people if you're going to also register them to vote. You wouldn't, you couldn't persuade them to vote for a certain candidate. But it's perfectly acceptable to educate people on your issue and then ask, are you registered to vote? And then, initiate the voter registration process. And so that could happen when you're knocking on doors. That could happen if you're tabling at an event, if you're having a neighborhood meeting, just a regular neighborhood meeting, which a lot of people are doing now. You can do that. You can integrate voter registration into all of those things. You just got to draw that line between partisan and issue-based organizing. So Kathy and Scott and Graciela, am I capturing that right, or anything else you want to add on that?
Kathy also mentioned that if there's 2 people at a table, maybe like I could register them to vote and then send them off to Brandon to talk about an issue. So then that way it doesn't get as murky, I think. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. It's quite a bit. I think Brandon described it really well, that if we stick to the issue, that's not a partisan matter. And so I think that's very helpful. The next election, I think, will be tougher, the 2020 election, to have that division. But, it's still doable. And I think it's important to know that the elections coming up in November are nonpartisan positions. There are individuals who are pushing to have these local elections become partisan, but to this point, we've been able to keep our local Board of Education and city commissioners nonpartisan.
Great. So yeah, again, you can integrate voter registration into like so many different things that you're already doing. If you have regular meetings, if you're, you could bookmark it on your phone. If you're just talking to somebody about your issue, at dinner or something, you could suppose you could register them right there too. It's actually really okay. So the next and last section that we put together in the toolkit is just some information on the last election. And so this is voter turnout, who voted, who did they vote for, and where did they vote. And the idea here, and you can read through this little guide on your own, but the idea is basically to have some idea of who's voting in Manhattan and who isn't. And that might, depending on your issue, give you some idea of where you might want to register voters, or which constituencies or age groups, in this case, you might want to focus your voter registration on. And so this little table at the bottom, again, this was the last city commission election in 2017. 22% of registered voters in the city of Manhattan actually voted. So that's just over 7,000 out of 33,000. So there's a lot of potential voters out there to get to the voting booths. And if you look at the breakdown by age, you'll see that, maybe unsurprisingly, that the vast majority of the voters were over 45, and nearly half of them were over 65. So that gives you, and 18 to 24 was only 4% of the entire, voting population. So 228 out of basically 5,500.
Yes, and this was also, if I may interject, this was also with a very young city commissioner on the ballot.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. There's a huge opportunity here to engage younger voters, is one interpretation of this. The other data that you'll find in here is the actual vote counts for the city commission candidates, and how many votes they got. And you'll know based on who's sitting on the city commission right now who the winners were. And also on this page is a list of voters by precinct. And so this page goes kind of in tandem with the next page, which I'll get to in just a second, which is a map of the city of Manhattan and all of the precincts. And so you're looking at, you can see these little white boxes, 511, 33, 32, 22. These are all precincts. And they're all, you can see they're all over the city. And each precinct, I believe, has its own, voting location. But really what I thought might be useful here is to know how many people are voting in those different precincts. And so, for example, if you were looking at precinct 1, Ward 1, precinct 1, so it would show up as 1-1 on the map, you could see how many people voted in total, who people were voting for, and then compare that to say, and so this looks like a lot, give or take, Ward 1, Precinct 1, but then you could compare that to Ward 3, Precinct 2 and see, very, very low numbers there. And then move over to, say, Ward 5, Precinct 9 and see, probably over 1,000 voters over there. And so you can get an idea of where people who are voting live, who they're voting for, and that might be useful for you in targeting where you want to do outreach efforts, where you might want to do some voter registration. Again, but that also, there's a lot of other factors there. But I did want to share this information with everybody in the case that it might be useful. So there is some other stuff below there, but it's frankly not as, I don't think it's as valuable or important. It's just basically a summary of the election stats and how people voted and things. But so yeah, any questions on that part, or anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing, and that is that Kansas passed an amendment for saying that people could vote at different precincts than their original one, but the funding wasn't put forward for it. We talked to the county clerk, and they are not going to be set up for the next election, and probably not for the 2020 election, because it passed, but it's not being enforced, and it's not because they're dragging their feet, but it was such a quick change, and the infrastructure is not set up to be able to do that. So if anybody asks and says, well, didn't they pass a law where I could vote anywhere I wanted to at any precinct? They can vote in the other precincts, but it would be a provisional ballot. So they want to find out, and it's easy to do online. They want to find out where they're supposed to vote and vote there.
Great. Good point, Kathy. Any other questions or anything to add to that? Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, then I think we'll wrap up here. Like Graciela said, it really is, pretty straightforward. I think a lot of times it's really just kind of demystifying it and having somebody tell you that it's not hard and showing you how to do it. and that's what we wanted to do. So I think we did that. And again, this is going to be recorded. We'll put it up on maybe the MapJ YouTube page or something like that, and share it with everybody. But anything else for the good of the cause, folks?
Thank you, Kathy.
Well, you're very welcome.
Great
Thank
job.
you all of you are doing wonderful work, and I'm just very excited about sharing the wealth here. I do want to add that at K-State Votes, they are really working hard to get students registered on campus. And I think it's really very exciting. So we get our whole community involved and get 4% to look more like 96%.
Yeah. Yes, I love it. Well, nice job, team. Graciela, Scott, Kaylee, who couldn't be here, and Kathy, for all your support. And
thank you.
Yeah.
And Brandon, yeah, woo-hoo.
I know, thank you so much. And our only attendant, thank you so much for coming.
That John,
I think if we do a little push on this, we can get other people to watch it, and I think that would be useful.
Great.
Because then the other thing after the voting registration is the get out the vote, and that's where some of those numbers of how people have actually voted in different places could be really significant.
Yeah, that's a good point. Great. All right, y'all. Good to see your faces. And Scott, good to hear your voice.
You too.
thank you.
Have a good night, y'all.
Goodbye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.